Good evening. Welcome to this evening's Sober Second Thinkers speaker series. I like alliteration, I tell you. My name is Linda Harling-Stalker. I'm the director of the Brian Mulroney Institute of Government. In this series, we invite senators to give their reflections on their time in the Senate and to talk about the importance of sober second thought in an era of increased partisanship and division. Tonight, our special guest is Senator Mary Coyle, a Canadian senator representing our area in the Red Chamber since 2017. Before I continue with introducing Senator Coyle, I'd like to acknowledge that this evening we meet on Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. These lands are to be governed by the Peace and Friendship Treaties of 1725 and 1799. As the work for decolonization continues down its oftentimes slow path, we must honor the relationality and the reciprocity of friendship in the spirit of these treaties. It is incumbent upon ourselves to remember that we are all treaty people. So now let me give you the official part of my introduction for our honored guest. Senator Mary Coyle has devoted her career to advancing women's leadership, gender equality, shared prosperity, and Indigenous rights with a focus on local and international development. Her early work includes roles in Botswana and Indonesia, supporting economic, regional, and community development. As executive director of Calmetto for 10 years, she supported the pioneering of innovative microfinance initiatives internationally and across Canada. This included the world's first commercial microfinance bank in Bolivia and the First Peoples Fund for Indigenous Communities in Canada. Joining St. Francis Xavier University in 1997, serving as University Vice President and Director of the Coady International Institute, she led the Institute's innovative agenda and expansion of its global programs for women, youth, and Indigenous leaders. She also served as the executive director of the Frank McKenna Center for Leadership here at St. FX. Senator Coyle is honored to have played a key role in the establishment of the Stephen Lewis Foundation, the Dallaire Institute for Children, Peace and Security, the Indian School of Microfinance for Women, and the Haitian Center for Leadership and Excellence. She served on the boards of the Microfinance Support Facility for Afghanistan, the International Development Research Center, the North-South Institute, and Cooperation Canada. In the Senate, she serves on the Indigenous Peoples and Foreign Affairs Committees and is co-founder and co-chairs Senators for Climate Solutions. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Language and Literature. Any students wondering what you can do in an arts degree? Here we are. And a Master of Arts in Rural Planning and Development from the University of Guelph. With 3 daughters and 7 grandchildren, Senator Coyle remains committed to addressing key issues such as global cooperation, human rights, and climate, all critical to Canada's leadership on the global stage. Now for the informal part. Do you know in meetings when you need to declare a conflict of interest for agenda items? That's kind of what I feel like I should do now. My daughter has the privilege of working as a law student in Senator Coyle's office for the last 2 years. Let me tell you, I have heard nothing but positive sentiments about Senator Coyle and those in her office. My daughter's friends who work in the Senate say that Senator Coyle's office is one of the nicest. While being nice may sound soft, I would argue differently. I would say that the leadership in the office, that is Senator Coyle, embodies an ethic of care and respect that can be difficult to find in today's world. Knowing that that exists in one of our nation's key political institutions is heartening and provides hope. This evening, we are privileged to hear Senator Coyle talk about the work she does on our behalf in the Red Chamber. Her talk, I've been talking too long, obviously. Her talk, Stories from the Red Chamber, representing Nova Scotia in Canada's mostly independent upper chamber, will give insight into the experiences she has amassed over the last 7 years. After the talk, I'll be walking around with a microphone for a Q&A, so please save your questions till then. But now, please join me in welcoming Senator Mary Coyle to the podium.
Wow. Thank you so much. Am I on? Okay. Can you hear me all right? All right. And I can see you. This is great. Thank you so much, Linda and Anna and the Mulroney Institute team, and to professors, I don't know if Professor Clark's here, but Professor Murphy, for inviting me into your classes today. That was a real treat for me. And I see we managed to get some of those students to come back out again tonight. Thank you to also a group of people who are not here tonight. My staff team, Devin, Christina, Daniel, Asta, Linda's daughter, Jessica, and Dada. Fabulous team of people who support me and help me get ready for tonight. And thank you to you, each and every one of you, for being here. I feel supported. I feel nervous, but I feel supported to see you here. My Senate colleague, Senator PJ, who I understand is not feeling well. I appreciate you being here, Senator Prosper. The St. of X community, VP Amanda, who's, I think, knitting up there. Yeah, it's great. My friends, lots of you here. It's really wonderful to see you. And my family, my daughters, Lindy and Lauren, and my honorary daughter, Keenan, who are here to support me tonight. This is a little daunting for me, a person who has never taken a political science course in her life, but now really wishes she had. Anyway, I'm happy to be here following my colleagues, Senator Wanda Thomas Bernard, who was my sponsor when I was sworn into the Senate, and Senator PJ Prosper, who spoke last week, for whom I served as sponsor when he was sworn into the Senate. It's really a treat for me to be back at X and to be hosted here at the beautiful Mulroney Institute. And I'll just tell you a real quick story. Every time I walk into this building, I think of the homecoming weekend football game of 1999. Was anybody there? I was. And I was co-host to Brian Mulroney and Mila Mulroney at that football game. I was running Cody at the time. And Mr. Mulroney pointed up to the top of the hill from the stands, those, the football stands over there, and said, "What's that up there?" And I said, "Well, there's Nicholson and there's the annex." He said, "Yeah, like in there, that'd be perfect." And what he was planning was a library on the model of the presidential libraries in the US. And I think we got a much better deal in the end, because here we are in this beautiful facility. Lovely to be here tonight. So the plan for this evening is for me to speak with you about today's modern Senate. And I know we have some political scientists in the room who are probably interested in some of that Senate geeky stuff. So I'll give you some of that. And the modern Senate is a work in progress. And I'm also going to speak about our work and about my work. And hopefully some of that will resonate with each of you. And the plan, of course, is to leave a good amount of time at the end to have a conversation with you, to answer your questions, to listen to any issues you want to raise, have a discussion here. So let's see if this works. I'm trying to get used to all this. See, we're not allowed to have technology in the Senate at all. So look at that, it worked. So today's Senate. I ended up in the Senate, a very unusual person, as most of us are now in the Senate, because most of us would have never dreamed of being in the Senate. I believe that's the case for PJ as well. The Senate, we used to think of anyway as a place where people who were, firm supporters of one party or the other, or even had served in a elected capacity for one of the main parties here in Canada. Never saw myself as pretty much a non-partisan person being in the Senate until this opportunity came up when you could actually apply to be a senator, which is what I did. I didn't get it the first time. I'm used to that. I don't always get what I want. And I was happy the two people who did get the first two independent seats from Nova Scotia. They were Dan Christmas and Senator Wanda Thomas Bernard. Who can argue with those choices, right? So I was thrilled that those two got it. But I tried again. I tried again when I was actually living through breast cancer and chemo treatments. And I was actually overnight in the emergency department up at St. Martha's having a bad reaction to my chemo treatment the night before the new Senate application was due. And I thought, am I going to get out of this place? Am I going to get home? Am I going to be able to put this together? Imagine thinking about that kind of stuff. Because I was really attracted to this new entity, the modern Senate. And I thought, well, I would love to be a part of that. I didn't think I would get it necessarily, but at least get it out there in case there's a possibility. And I did get it. My application, I didn't know this. It took months and months and months until they finally called me and said, oh, you're in the running. Didn't know how much in the running I was. And then finally, after you guys heard me talk about this today, I think, it was like one of those shakedown meetings on the phone with somebody from the Prime Minister's office, skeletons in the closet. Got any? And I thought, oh, what do you mean by skeletons in the closet? Anyway, I couldn't find any. And did any of your family got skeletons in the closet? I don't think so. Anyway, ultimately, I was at a meeting with the board, campaign board for St. Martha's Hospital Foundation, which I served on, and a call came. And this woman said, will you be available for a phone call on Saturday between 1 and 4 with somebody senior in the government? I said, yeah, sure, I'd be happy to take the call. Again, I still didn't know what was coming. Between 1 and 4, it was Prime Minister Trudeau calling. And I said to him, I thought you were in China, because we all knew in Canada he was on his way to China at that point. He said, I am. I'm in Vancouver. I'm on my way. But I wanted to call you first, and I wanted to invite you to be a senator. I hope you will take it. He said the reasons he wanted me. And he said to me, and you will not hear from me. This is an independent Senate. I want you to be an independent senator, and I don't want you to think that there will be any influence coming from me. So I think every one of I think it happened to you, PJ, the same way. We trade stories. We all had that same talk from him. So it was an interesting way to start. Now, okay, I have to click to the next slide. There we go. I'll tell you a little bit about the Senate. So the Senate in numbers. So you can see here the Senate has 105 seats. There are actually 100 of them are populated right now by senators. There's a new senator from BC just announced. There are 5 vacancies, including one from Nova Scotia, in case any of you want to apply. If you're under 75 and over 30, we have, as you can see, pretty close to parity in terms of men and women in the Senate. That's never happened before. We have 9 senators of African descent. We have 12 Indigenous senators. We have 3 Mi'kmaq senators, including our very own Senator Prosper. There are 4 who identify as LGBTQ senators. So it's quite a remarkable place. And for the backgrounds of people, my background, you heard all about it. I don't have to tell you about that. We have 2 university presidents. We have former elected politicians. We have 3 mayors, journalists, social workers, entrepreneurs, bankers, teachers, nurses, a plumber, the former heads of the Ontario Provincial Police and the RCMP, an environmental engineer, an Afghan war veteran, 2 deputy ministers, a former G7 Sherpa, former head of the Canadian Labour Congress, First Nations chiefs, and many senators who were born outside of Canada, including Haiti, Zimbabwe, Cameroon, Peru, the UK, France, Pakistan, Guyana, Jamaica, Malaysia, and other nations. So quite an interesting place. And here you can see the Nova Scotian senators. I won't read all the names. As I said, there's one vacancy, as you see here. 7 men, 2 women. And as you see here, Senator Wanda and I are women number 4 and 5 in all of the history of women representing Nova Scotia in Canada, in the Senate. So we're doing well on the overall representation of women in the Senate writ large across the country, but I don't know. I don't think we've got any lack of good women here in Nova Scotia. And I've been, promoting, encouraging people to apply, I can't influence the process of selection, but anyway, that's where we are. Okay, so I'm gonna move it on. Click to the next slide, it says. Okay, independence. What does this look like? What does it mean? And you may have more questions later on. In 2014, the Supreme Court made a reference on the Senate. The justices affirmed that the Senate should be, and I quote, a thoroughly independent body which could canvass dispassionately the measures of the House of Commons, end of quote. Prime Minister Trudeau, before he was Prime Minister, when he was leader of the Liberal Party in the Stephen Harper government, removed the Liberal senators from the National Liberal Caucus. They were, many, not very happy about that, but that's another point. In 2016, the process of appointing independent senators happened, and it is said to be the most profound reform in the history of the Senate of Canada. And when the Trudeau Liberals took over government from the Harper Conservatives in November 2015, the Senate was composed of 46 Conservatives, 29 Liberals, 7 non-affiliated, and 1 independent progressive Conservative. And there were 22 vacancies, okay? So now look at this pie graph that you see up here in front of you. As you can see, there are now 5 groups in the Senate. I'm a member of the Independent Senators Group, which is the largest group. Then you have the Canadian Senators Group, which is also an independent group. You have the Progressive Senators Group, which is also another group of independents. You have the Conservative Caucus. So that's your only, today, that's your only political caucus operating in the Senate of Canada, and there are only 12 out of the 105 seats, and that will go down to 11 this month, when they lose their leader, Don Plett, the plumber that I mentioned from Manitoba. He will be retiring this month. And then you have this category of unaffiliated. And so unaffiliated are people who are either newly appointed and haven't joined one of these groups, or they are people who just don't want to be in a group, or they are the 3 members who represent the government in the Senate. So the government has 3 representatives right now, the government representative, the deputy, and the liaison. So that's the story of the Senate right now. As for features, I mentioned to you that there's an independent application process. There's an independent advisory board who chooses from those applications, vets the applications, chooses from them, gives the Prime Minister's office 5 options for each seat, and then the selection goes from there. So that's a very interesting innovation. What are the advantages? First, I'm going to not look at the new Senate, just the Senate in general. What's so good about the Senate? One of the great things about the Senate is its continuity. Right, like right now, Parliament's prorogued. And some of us, okay, we're not doing our legislative work, but we're still working and doing all kinds of things. And during and after elections, right? You know, where the same people that were in those seats before the election are going to be the same people who are in those seats after the election. So you've got that continuity. Because of that, you have longer term thinking. And your efforts are not squandered, because whatever efforts you're putting out will continue to be harnessed no matter what the election cycles, right? And also we have, as senators, by the very nature of our operations, we take the time to dig deeply into legislation and into issues. Now, what are the advantages of the modern Senate? Okay. Well, senators now represent the diversity of the wider population of Canada. And when you appoint people, you can appoint them much more easily than elect them in terms of a diverse House, right? Independent senators are completely free of partisan influence on their work and their decisions. Nobody says to me, Mary, you have to do this, you have to say this, or you have to vote this way. None of us are being told to do that, and that's a change. We are unencumbered, and we can work to improve legislation. In the 41st Parliament, the last term of Prime Minister Harper's government, only 1 in 61 bills was amended by the Senate, 1 in 61. During the 42nd Parliament, which was the Parliament when I joined, the first term of Prime Minister Trudeau's government, 33 of 88 government bills were amended by the Senate. And it's agreed that those were good amendments, improvements. Now, what are the criticisms? Lots of criticisms. The previous Senate, the original Senate, lots of complaints about unfair patronage, a rubber stamp chamber, an echo chamber of the House of Commons, tainted by the expense scandal. What are the criticisms of the Senate in general? Unelected, question of legitimacy in a democratic nation, the cost of operating this, is it worth it? And what about the criticisms of the modern Senate? Accusations of not really being independent. Oh, you guys, you're all Trudeau liberals. And actually, some of the newly appointed senators have ties to provincial or federal liberals. The Senate, people say, the Senate works better as a government and opposition chamber. There's a fear that senators, if they're so independent, they won't follow the Salisbury Convention, which is deferring to the elected chamber and their electoral mandate. Okay, so those are some of the criticisms. And there's unfinished business, right? We are a work in progress. While the independent appointment process is very positive, independent senators found ourselves in a chamber that operated according to the old rules of the old duopoly. Government and opposition, liberal and conservative, whoever that might be at that time. While the large majority of us are no longer members of government or opposition, and we've been disadvantaged for many years by by operating under these old rules. So in 2024, we were successful in changing some of the rules around speaking time, committee participation, hours of the Senate, written questions, and decision-making on bells for votes to accommodate the large majority of us. Much more needs to be done to inform Canada, of course, about the work of the Senate, and that's one of the reasons I'm here today. Okay. So what do Canadians think about the Senate? Actually, not a whole lot, right? Most don't think very much or know very much, if anything, about the Senate, to be honest. And I'll be honest, I didn't know nearly as much as I should have when I became a senator. Okay. Now this is interesting. Here you have a Nanos poll done a year ago, and even though most Canadians may not know much about the Senate, when they hear about this modernization, the modern independent Senate, Canadians generally like the direction that it's going in, and here's some of those results. So as you can see, 69% of Canadians polled, 79% of Atlantic Canadians want the future government, whatever government it is, to keep the reforms that have created this Senate since 2015. You can see how many senators were appointed by Trudeau, and The percentage, 93% of Canadians polled see new senators sitting as independent and not active in a political party as a good thing. 7% say that that's not so good. Okay, so that's quite a big difference. And as you see, Canadians like this idea of the Independent Advisory Board that reviews and assesses the applications. And 67% see the open application process that I described as very positive. But negative impressions of the Senate still outweigh positive. But negative numbers are declining. We watch these kinds of things, right? So from 65% negative in 2015 to now 51% in 2024. So, and again, these is when people hear about what this is about, okay? So that's to satisfy some of our political scientists in the room. Hope you like that data, okay? We like it because we are using it, you know, because if there is a change of government, there's a big chance that this will not persist, right? This independence. Okay, so sober second thinking. How does that work? Well, the word sober has a couple of meanings, right? And when I mentioned I was speaking at a sober second thinking series, some people thought I was going to talk about not drinking alcohol and my sobriety. But that's not what I'm talking about tonight. I'll talk to you about that another time if you'd like. I'll be talking about right now the other meaning of sober, which is a very important meaning senators exercising our roles by applying a serious, sensible, and some would say wise approach to our parliamentary duties. The Senate is an important part of the built-in checks and balances in Canada's parliamentary system. Prime Minister John A. Macdonald said, and I quote, "The Senate was to be a place of sober second thinking so that legislation could receive proper, careful consideration before becoming law," end of quote. So we're going to look at some of the various ways we apply sober second thinking in the Senate in some examples that I'm going to bring to you, okay? That not work? There we go. Thank you. It's a comfort having you there. So I'm going to talk to you about the 3 historic roles of senators plus 1, the new one that comes with the new Senate. So legislate, investigate, represent, and reform. That's the plus 1, reform. These roles of investigation, legislation, and representation are all interconnected. I'm going to talk about them separately, but they're all interconnected. And each is very critical to sober second thinking, and sober second thinking is critical to each of them. With the modern independent Senate as a work in progress, as I've mentioned, and senators to a large degree being masters in our own house. This is a test. Has anybody heard that term, masters in our own house, mentioned lately by a certain candidate of the Liberal Party? Well, we are actually masters in our own house in terms of our rules and how we operate. So that means that the reform part is part of our job. And you will see from this slide a little bit of an overview of my own personal participation in the chamber in my first 7 years. I've been a senator for 7 years, and you can see that I've made 360, I'm a blabbermouth, I've made 361 interventions in the Senate chamber. They might have been speeches on debate, statements, questions at question period. I am currently on you heard, the Foreign Affairs and the Indigenous Peoples Committee. I've also served on the Special Committee on the Arctic and the Fisheries and Oceans Committee, and I have participated on and off on all of these other committees: Transport and Communications, Legal and Constitutional, National Finance, Banking, human rights, and the internal economy, which is very much looking at how we run ourselves as a Senate. So that's it's a lot to do. I'll be speaking about debates on legislation in a couple of minutes, but I want to just talk about this thing called statements. Statements are an important 3-minute vehicle for drawing the attention of the chamber to issues of importance and matters of celebration. For instance, I've spoken in the chamber about the passing of Brian Mulroney, the 100th anniversary of the Antigonish movement, Dave Risk and the Flux Lab, World Oceans Day, Pride Month, African Heritage Months, Coach K, the 20 local recipients of the King Charles III Coronation Medal. And I think we might have somebody in the room who has won that medal. Okay, stories of a legislator. Legislation, and in particular government legislation, is our absolute top priority, top duty as senators. All types of legislation, not just legislation that we find interesting or we like or we think is important, but legislation that is put forward by the government of the day is our priority and is our main work. Each piece of legislation has a sponsor in the Senate, someone who shepherds it through the chamber. I have served as the sponsor of 3 government bills, one on border information, one on offshore tax havens, and one on the Chemical Weapons Convention. None within my normal knowledge base, right? The first bill that I voted on in the Senate was the one making our national anthem inclusive. No more in all our sons command, it's now all of us command. And that was really great to be there for that. I've been there for medical assistance in dying. I've spoken on that. I've spoken on the Sustainable Jobs Act, on firearms legislation, on conversion therapy, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, Emancipation Day, pharmacare, the Canada Emergency Student Benefit, which was really important to students across the country at the time of the pandemic, and the Jane Goodall bill, among others. Government bills usually originate in the House, but are sometimes introduced as Senate or what we call S bills. There are also private members' bills from the House and their counterpart in the Senate, Senate public bills. All bills go through the same stages in both houses. First reading, second reading, committee, committee, report, third reading, and if passed, royal assent. And royal assent happens in the Senate. The speech from the throne happens in the Senate because we are the upper house of Canada's Parliament, okay? You probably all know these things, but so sober second thinking takes place all along that process, right? Both individually and collectively, we are doing sober second thinking. Sometimes we pre-study important bills so that we can be more efficient when we receive them from the House. And to give you the flavor of the work of a legislator, the next slide is actually a video recording, and I'll warn you, it's about 12 minutes, of my second reading speech on the Indigenous Languages Bill. I thought I would give you a break from listening to me here and getting to see me on the screen in the chamber in action.
Senator Coyle.
Honourable Senators, I rise today to add my voice in support of Bill C-91, an act respecting Indigenous languages. I want to thank my colleague Senator Sinclair for introducing this important bill in such an informative, eloquent, and compelling manner as only he can. And also thank you to Senator Gagné for your interventions. As some of you know, my early studies were in linguistics and in the field of modern languages. I have also lived and worked in languages other than my own, Setswana in Botswana, Bahasa Indonesia in Indonesia. When we are immersed in another culture and language, we come to understand the people and how they see the world. I am proud to live in the territory known as Mi'kma'ki, the land of our colleagues Senator Christmas and Senator Francis. And I am honored to be a member of the Aboriginal Peoples Committee, which completed the pre-study on Bill C-91. And like Senator Patterson, I'm honored to be a member of the Arctic Committee. In my remarks, I will touch briefly on the international, mention a beautiful local Nova Scotian example, and finish with drawing all of our attention to the unique situation of the Inuit in Canada. As Senator Sinclair mentioned, this bill is timely for many reasons. It is coming to us in the International Year of Indigenous Languages, and it is urgent. The International Year of Indigenous Languages aims to focus attention on the risks, and these are serious risks, confronting Indigenous languages, especially those significant for development, reconciliation, good governance, and for peace building. Award-winning Kenyan writer Ngugi wa Thiong'o said, "Language is a carrier of culture. Culture is a carrier of people's values. Values are carriers of people's outlook or conscience and sense of identity. Through language, we can deduce the personality and the general perspective of the people. Language portrays people's identity. Therefore, to be without language is to be lost." End of quote. Like the Indigenous peoples of Canada, Kenyans have seen languages lost or threatened due to the long and deep effects of harsh colonization. During the course of our pre-study of Bill C-91, we heard that the vitality of Indigenous languages varies across Canada. We heard of tragic losses of language, and we heard of many innovative, valiant, and highly effective efforts of Indigenous peoples across Canada to reclaim, revitalize, promote, and protect their precious and sacred languages. In my own backyard, Mi'kmaq Kinamatanewe, how'd I do? Or MK, is an organization that protects and promotes the educational and Mi'kmaq language rights of the Mi'kmaq people. Earlier this week, I was thrilled to see on my Facebook feed that Public Radio International, PRI, broadcasts the story of 16-year-old Eskasoni First Nation resident Emma Stevens singing the Beatles' song Blackbird in Mi'kmaq, Buliskewech. Did you hear it? Yes. Emma recorded the song as part of her school's effort to celebrate the UN Year of Indigenous Languages. She says in the interview with PRI that the lyrics, "Take these broken wings and learn to fly," resonate with her. She has seen her language slowly diminishing, but singing this song in Mi'kmaq inspires her to learn her language and to show non-Mi'kmaq people the beauty of that language. It is said that Paul McCartney wrote Blackbird about the civil rights movement in the US. People in Eskasoni draw parallels with their own oppression and struggle, and also parallels with their strength and pride. I highly recommend you listen to the beautifully sung Mi'kmaq language song. Just Google Blackbird and Emma Stevens, and you are in for a treat. With an estimated 10,000 Mi'kmaq people in eastern Canada and the northeastern US, it is critical to keep the Mi'kmaq language alive. It is also important and enriching for us, the neighbors of the Mi'kmaq people. I would now like to bring to your attention the voices of some of the people we heard from, not at our Aboriginal Peoples Committee, but in our Arctic Committee. Our Arctic Committee has been working on a study which looks at the rapid changes in the Arctic and its effects on the people and the land. Mr. Erik Sivertsen, representing the county of Nordland in the Norwegian Parliament, said, and I quote, "We create and understand our world through the language we use, and therefore the language is the most important part of preserving or developing the culture of a people. If you don't have your own language, your culture cannot survive. This must be one of the main tasks to support Indigenous people with small and threatened languages to help them preserve and to develop their language in the modern world." Aluki Kotiak, president of Nunavut Tungavik Incorporated, was also clear in her presentation to our Arctic Committee. a champion, a fierce champion of the Inuktitut language, she said, and she taught us a lot about some of our historical commitments here, and it's important to listen to what has happened since Nunavut was created. She said, "I am here from Nunavut, the only jurisdiction in Canada where the Indigenous population is the majority. Spread over 25 communities, all fly-in communities, Inuit make up 85% of the population. Roughly half of the Inuit are under the age of 25. The first language of the majority of Inuit in Nunavut is still Inuktitut. Both French and English are minority languages." She continued, "I am sure that you're all very well versed on the legacy of colonialism and residential schools." And we heard our colleagues speak of this. "You are aware of the concerted efforts through assimilation policies that tried to strip us away from our language and our culture. Part of the reason why Inuit worked so tirelessly to settle the Nunavut agreement was so that as Inuit, we could continue to assert our self-determination and we could continue to have our Inuit culture and language thrive. But when we entered into our Nunavut agreement with Canada, we had a healthy Inuktitut language. Our language is dying at 1% per year. On July 14, 1998, then Finance Minister Paul Martin and his officials informed a federally appointed interim commissioner for Nunavut that Inuit would not receive federal funding for Inuktitut as the working language of the territorial government. Instead, it was stated that Inuktitut would be addressed at a later date. Okay, so the promise of it being addressed at a later date. In 2001, the first data set was gathered after Canada decided to postpone funding for Inuktitut for government services in Nunavut. At that time, 85% of Inuit in Nunavut still declared Inuktitut as their mother language, but more importantly, 68% of Inuit said it was still the main language used in their homes. This, despite the efforts that were made to make people speak English. As of 2016, so 15 years later, these numbers have dropped by 20%. Mother tongue Inuktitut is now 63%. Home language Inuktitut is 49.7%. 20 years since the Liberal government at the time said they would address Inuktitut as the working language of our government at a later date, and 20% of our language is gone. This is significant. According to Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedom, all Canadians are entitled to essential public services of a reasonable quality. Inuit, Ms. Cotier continues, are not receiving essential services of a reasonable quality because they are not being delivered in Inuktitut. Inuit lives should not be put at risk because they are not able to receive appropriate health services, for example, in Inuktitut. She continues, the federal government has committed to developing an Indigenous language legislation. This bill we are here discussing today. This is a good initiative. In Nunavut, Inuktitut is already recognized as an official language territorially. What we need is for the federal government to recognize that Inuktitut is an official founding language of the Nunavut territory. Maybe only then would Nunavut Inuit be able to reasonably expect quality essential services delivered in Nunavut. End of quote. Okay, then I go on to just two more people who, and I'm using their voices because they are powerful and they should be amplified in this chamber. The president of Inuit Tapiret Kanatami, Natan Obed, also addressed our committee on this bill. On the First Nations, Inuit and Métis Languages Act, we've worked with this government from its inception on the ambition of an Indigenous languages bill. The level of ambition was something that was basically unfettered until recently. We had hoped to have official language status for Inuktitut in Inuit Nunangat, and we still hope for that. We hope to have service delivery rights in relation to Inuktitut in league with the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and its implementation in this country, and the rights we have as Indigenous peoples globally beyond that declaration. End of quote. It is appropriate, colleagues, that today we have both Bill C-91, the Indigenous Languages legislation, and Bill C-262, an act to ensure the laws of Canada are in harmony with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And the final voice that I will amplify here is that of Paul Quassa, Premier of Nunavut. Mr. Quassa said, "The lives of the Inuit are forever changed by the policies and programs that took Inuit from their homes, denying them their language and culture, placing them in unfamiliar lands and communities, and separating them from a way of life they had always known. Many of us lost our language, our culture, our traditions, which is, of course, our identity. Many struggled with trying to reconcile the ways of the past and their present. Many turned to alcohol and drugs, to violence or suicide, and have been profoundly impacted by these actions, and many today are still struggling in these ways. Reclaiming our Inuit language, culture, and agency is necessary to right these historical wrongs." End of quote. Colleagues, Mr. Quassa speaks of that imperative of reclaiming Inuit language, culture, and agencies. These three items are inextricably connected. Bill C-91 is about Indigenous languages, and it is about so much more. Mr. Quassa speaks of agency. Ms. Kotiark and others speak of self-determination. For a person to have agency means they will have the will, the power, and the capacity to act. We have heard loudly and clearly from these committed Inuit leaders and from their First Nations and Métis counterparts that their languages are essential to having the capacity to lead and develop the strong, healthy, and proud societies and communities they want, and of which they were deprived for far too long. Honourable Senators, I hope we can send Bill C-91 to committee soon so we can ensure that this historically significant piece of legislation can be given the consideration it deserves. Thank you. Merci. Walaleo.
Oh, thanks. We don't always get that kind of applause in the chamber. Thank you very much. I'm sorry it was a little bit long. I probably could have cut it, but you get the flavor of what it is to be a legislator and to represent, as senators, we have to represent all Canadians. Of course, I represent Nova Scotia as my own region, but all Canadians. As a member, I happen to be fortunate that I was on both the Indigenous Peoples Committee and the Arctic Committee, which no longer exists. It was a special committee, and this distinction, because we often think about things in simple terms. Oh, Indigenous languages, they're being lost. We got to do something. Well, we have to do many things and very different things in very different situations. And you can imagine the situation with the Inuit, who have been losing so rapidly something that they have that most other Indigenous peoples in Canada don't have to that degree, right? And so they're so desperate to hold on to it, protect it, and bring it back for their children. Anyway, I could go on, but I won't. I'll move on. Oh, sorry. Stories of an investigator. So we legislate, we investigate. Second role. Where am I? Here we go. So our committees, Senate committees, are the heart and soul of the Senate. This is where we do a lot of that in-depth study. This is where we have access to experts on many different issues. Studying government legislation is the priority at committees, and our committees also do studies on important issues. My Foreign Affairs Committee, for instance, recently completed a study on Canada's foreign service. Is it fit for purpose, for today's purpose? Well, we probably should redo that study now, given what's going on in our world. I mean, there was already a lot going on in our world when we were doing it, right? Our Indigenous Peoples Committee has completed many, many studies, including a recent study on the status of the government's commitments and fulfillment of its commitments to the calls to justice of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls inquiry. In addition to committees, there are many ways that senators work to inform ourselves and our peers through inquiries, meeting with people and organizations in the office or where they are, visiting prisons. I've visited 4 prisons now and 1 immigration detention center, participating in groups like the Anti-Poverty Caucus, and a new group, relatively new group, we started, that's going to be mentioned in this very short video, 3 minutes, taken from a longer speech I was making in response to the speech from the throne. This, and you'll see in this next little speech, I'm actually speaking from my house over there. It's during COVID, and so you're not going to see the chamber this time.
Emerging from the COVID pandemic, we are facing need to reconcile 2 once-in-a-century imperatives. 1, accelerating our response to the climate emergency with the associated imperative of a just transformation. And 2, the need to rebuild our post-pandemic economy. Both required focused attention on the well-being and the potential of our citizens, of women, youth, Indigenous people, oil and gas sector workers, and other groups severely affected, while being mindful of equity across Canada's regions. No one and no region should be left behind. Honourable colleagues, that is a tall order, and one which will require bold leadership and all hands on deck. It will take an all-of-society approach, and that means a role for us too. Canadian senators stepping up with our Senate independence and free of the constraints of short-term electoral cycles. Imagine what we could do with our combined gray matter, diversity of experience, power, and influence. We have high-quality studies, inquiries, question period opportunities, motions. Most importantly, we scrutinize and, where necessary, work to improve or initiate legislation. And today, I would like to propose a new way we as senators could lead in climate action. This is what I'm about to tell you about. Colleagues, last month I had a call from Baroness Helene Hayman, former Lord Speaker, and Baroness Bryony Worthington, lead author of the UK Climate Change Act. They had learned about our net zero inquiry and wanted to discuss potential collaboration between our chambers. They're co-founders of Peers for the Planet, the UK House of Lords group, launched last year with 120 members. Both felt there was more parliamentarians could do to tackle climate change, and they recognized the unique potential to work across and practical changes in policies and laws, regardless of which party's in government. Their collaborative big tent approach has yielded concrete results in a number of areas. Honourable colleagues, I am impressed with the momentum and results Peers for the Planet have been able to build, and I'm proposing to you today that we start our own similar Red Chamber group focused on Canada's pressing climate change response. 51 years after the first Earth Day initiated by American Senator Gaylord Nelson, and a year after UK Baronesses Hayman and Worthington launched Peers for the Planet, I am keen to work with you to formulate our own uniquely constituted and mandated Senate of Canada Coalition for Urgent Climate Action. Just imagine what we could do if we marshal our collective ingenuity and combine it with our unfaltering perseverance. Honourable colleagues, if not us, who? If not now, when? Let's do it. Who's in? Thank you.
Okay, so we're still under this investigator thing, right? How do we learn to be good legislators? And what we did right after that was create a group called Senators for Climate Solutions. And I'm the co-founder and now co-chair of that group. Senator Prosper is a member of that group. About half of the Senate chamber are members of that group. We have representatives of every group in the Senate. The first person to put his hand up was a Conservative senator to join the group. We have representatives from across the country. And the group really brings senators together to inform ourselves and to work together to find effective solutions to climate change. We're a big tent, just like you heard the Peers for the Planet in the UK. They call it a big church over there in the UK. We call it a big tent. We're more camping types here in Canada. And the idea is to create a space you know, you were talking about sober second thinking and issues of polarization and partisanship. This is to try to remove the climate issues from that partisan space and to say, hey, there's something we can all do together here. We're not dogmatic. We are careful about not saying, well, this is the solution or that is the solution. We hold sessions for our senators. For instance, well, first of all, we got senators invited to the annual UN meetings of the Conference of the Parties on Climate. We were never invited before. Now, a member of each of the groups in the Senate gets invited. We lobbied for that, and that happens. We have webinars and in-person events on topics such as climate finance. We had one called Powering Canada's Future, What Will It Take to Green and Grow the Grid? Another one called Keeping the Lights On, Ensuring Energy Security and Stability in the Transition to Net Zero. Another one called Fires, Floods, Hurricanes, and Heat Domes, Adaptation and Building Resilience and we've had speakers like Mark Carney, Fatih Birol, the head of the International Energy Agency, and Catherine Hayhoe, atmospheric scientist from Texas Tech, who famously said, the thermometer is not liberal or conservative. We produce briefing notes, do analysis of the budgets and the fall economic statement. We have international connections with Peers for the Planet, Climate Parliament internationally, Globe International, and U.S. climate caucuses. We're now planning for Senators for Climate Solutions 2.0, which will start in the next Parliament. We're trying to figure out what have we done well, could we be doing better, what could we be doing new and different. We're developing a climate lens, like a gender lens tool to use on legislation. We are planning, and hopefully it will happen under the next Parliament, a Canada Youth Climate Assembly, a citizens' assembly on climate for youth. Okay, those are just a few of the things we're doing. Oops, no, we got enough of her. Okay. Representative, that's the third of the three main roles. So we represent regional interests and minority interests. That's our job. Interests of those underrepresented in the elected chamber. The Constitution tells us that the Senate was created to give the regions of Canada an equal voice in Parliament. That's why Nova Scotia has 10 seats. We needed the 10 in order to agree to join in with Confederation. The kinds of examples of people that we need to be thinking about in the Senate are people living with disabilities, the LGBTQ community, Indigenous peoples, people living with mental health issues, substance abuse disorders, incarcerated people, children who don't have a vote, right? Refugees, people living in poverty, rural communities, people impacted by war, people impacted by intimate partner violence, you know, among other areas. We have to be constantly thinking about those people in our work. And for example, after the tragic April 2020 mass murders that started in Portapique in our own province, two fellow Nova Scotians and I worked hard to amplify the voices of the victims' families and call on the provincial and federal government for a full inquiry into this absolute tragedy, because it warranted a thorough and full inquiry. And I'm not saying that we are the ones that got it, but we worked hard with those families to make sure their voices were amplified. We spoke with the Prime Minister, we spoke with the ministers, we spoke even with the Nova Scotia leadership, and we spoke a lot with the media on that issue. And when studying, for instance, the bill on medical assistance to dying, I made a point to come locally and meet with L'Arche and to meet with a physician here locally who knows what medical assistance in dying looks like in our own community here in Antigonish. There are many ways to represent, and one that I've found useful is asking questions publicly during our daily question period. Question period is not just the opposition now asking the government representative. All of those independent types are asking all kinds of questions, more questions than the opposition is now asking. And this is just an example of that related to my role as representative. I hope I get this right.
Senator Coyle.
My question is for the government representative in the Senate. Senator Gold, those dark clouds, cold rains, and biting winds we experienced on our way to the Senate today remind me of the gloom that must be felt by people living with disabilities in Canada who are living in poverty today. Tuesday's budget announcement of the $200 per month Canada Disability benefit scheduled to flow in June 2025 to 600,000 Canadians is shocking. It's disappointing, and it is not what was promised. It is, quite frankly, too little, too late for too few. Senator Gold, will the government commit to reviewing this benefit as announced and come back with an improved plan that will actually help bring Canadians living with disabilities, those needing that support, out of poverty and into the life of dignity that they were promised and, frankly, they deserve?
Senator Gold.
And, thank you for your question. The government does not, will always and monitor its programs and will continue to work with those in the disability community to build and enhance this program. It is important, colleagues, to understand however, that the government is already doing a considerable amount to assist in this area. The government's Disability Inclusion Action Plan already includes about $1.7 billion per year to support persons with severe and prolonged mental and physical impairments through the Disability Tax Credit, and there's ongoing support for the Registered Disability Savings Plan. And the government is not shirking its responsibilities in this area, but is also going to calls upon the provinces and the territories to do their part within their jurisdiction to also assist persons with disabilities. And together, the government is committed to moving forward.
Okay, enough of that blah blah answer. I had a supplementary question, and he answers again. None of it's very satisfying. But that's just, I'm not picking on this exact issue, but just giving you an example of what we can do as representatives of Canadians, right? That's just one example of asking questions. And I've probably now asked more than 10 questions at question period on this, and formed with others a group of senators who are constantly on this issue with the Minister of Finance, when we each had a local member of parliament with our local member of parliament, to really call the government to account on what they had promised, which is not what we're getting in what we got in that budget, and what we'll be getting, what people with disabilities living in poverty will be getting in June. It's far less, as I said, too little. It's about a fifth of what was promised. It's a year later than it was expected, and far fewer people are eligible for it. So it's one of the things that we're working on. I'm almost through the final thing. Oh, sorry. So this is that +1 duties, right? An upper chamber reformer. I've already talked a lot about what's happening in the Senate to change the Senate and to accommodate its new independent character. I'll just mention one quick thing. Our independent senators group, the group I belong to, will be meeting in a couple of weeks to discuss a number of things, including how we protect the current appointment process and how we make further reforms, and what the strategies we need to use under different governance scenarios post-election. So we don't know what we're going to have post-election in Canada. We thought we knew, and it may be what we thought we knew in terms of the next government in Canada, but it could be slightly different or it could be dramatically different. So we're developing scenarios for all of those eventualities for when we're back after the election, and we don't even know when that is. Okay. Final reflections. So when Linda and Anna asked me to come speak with you tonight, I wondered what would I have to say to you. But once I got into the preparations, I realized I would actually only be able to scratch the surface, which is basically what I've been able to do tonight. Being a senator is really hard work. It's also very satisfying work. And it can be at times quite an onerous commute. Antigonish, Ottawa, quite a commute. But I have to say, honestly, I am so honored to represent you. And overall, it is a magnificent opportunity for me, personally, professionally, to be part of the Senate at any time, but also at this time as it takes on its modern independent character, and that we all have a role in shaping that. And lastly, I want to tell you that I love my work for 3 reasons, because people who've worked with me in the room know that I can only do 3 things. First, the first reason I love my work as a senator is I get to work with remarkably talented, committed, good people, no matter where they sit in the chamber as senators. So my fellow senators, the dedicated staff who support us, really top notch, and the many Canadians and people from around the world that I get to collaborate with. So the people, that's my first reason. My second reason that I love my work is that my brain is constantly on fire, and I love it. I love having my brain on fire because I'm being pushed. I'm not comfortable. I'm in all kinds of zones way outside of my knowledge or experience base. And even when I'm in those zones, my brain's on fire. And that challenge to me is something I love and appreciate. I get to learn about issues of importance to our country and to the world all the time. And finally, the third reason is I have been given this golden opportunity to hopefully make a difference in some way. I'm not some great savior, right? But hopefully in my little way, I'll be able to, with my colleagues, with Senator PJ and others, make a difference for the people in Canada and around the world. And who could want anything more than that? So it's time to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Senator Coyle. So we have about 20 to 30 minutes for questions. So I just ask, I'll walk around with the mic. I ask you to speak right into the mic so everyone can hear your question. I do ask you to keep it fairly brief so that we have a chance to get as many questions as possible this evening. So who would be, oh, we've got 2 brave souls already.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator Coyle. Could you please give us the highlights of that recent report investigating the calls to justice?
Oh, we're not doing so well. I mean, there's lots more to it, but honestly, there's so much more to do. And one of our fellow senators was one of the commissioners on that inquiry, Senator Michelle Odette, and she sits with us on that committee as we are considering, what should have been done by the government of Canada by now. There has been some progress, and I mean, there's a lot of detail, but I'm happy to share that report. And all of the Senate's committee reports are available on the website. So and some of these things are really excellent resources as well. I'm thinking for professors as well.
Thank you so much for your time tonight, Senator. Noticing on the display you had up there that you are on a committee that has to do with trade, I'm not sure that's an enviable place to be right now. But I'm very respectful of the fact that you are in a nonpartisan body, largely speaking to that as such a significant concern for what's facing the country right now. And if you briefly could touch on your opinions about the current state of what we're staring down as a country. I know that it's a super hot, sensitive topic. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Thanks for being here. And I understand Jen is doing some belly dancing right now. That's why she's not here. Okay. Yeah, there's a play coming up. So I'm sure this is what's on every one of our minds right now, what's going on in our world in terms of our relationship with our neighbor to the south, our main trading partner, our main ally, and until recently, and I'd say the people of the U.S. are still our main friends, close friends and neighbors. Honestly, it's very hard to predict. One of my colleagues, Senator Hassan Yousaf, who is the former head of the Canadian Labour Congress, and he's a member of our group. He was asked by the Prime Minister to be part of that Canada-US group, and we met with him a couple of weeks ago. Now that's old news now, but he basically said, "Go buy a lottery ticket." I mean, you just, and he's been a negotiator his whole life, right? Very involved in many negotiations, and he's never seen anything like this. Our other two colleagues who are former deputy ministers of foreign affairs, including the former G7 Sherpa, Peter Beam, who's now been the chair of our foreign affairs committee that I sit on. Peter's been on Power and Politics. Peter was just at the Munich summit. And again, he's never seen anything. And he saw Trump in the early days of Trump #1, Trump 1.0. But it was a very different time because Trump didn't expect to win that election, and he hadn't prepared to win. And so he was surrounded by people who knew what they were doing and were more reliable, hadn't been kicked out. And so it was a very different time. It was turbulent and problematic, but it wasn't like what we're experiencing today. So, I wish I had an answer for you. Our committee did study CUSMA, our current, or USMCA if you're American, CUSMA if you're Canadian, our free trade agreement with the US and with Mexico. And it was fascinating to study it because it was a very hard to negotiate agreement, which is now being, torn off and not adhered to. But we did do we did okay on that one. We did well. And there were shocks. There were tariffs at certain periods of time. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We just have no idea. But unfortunately, it's going to hurt. We are going to hurt. We're already hurting even without them because, investments are going elsewhere. There's all this, the one thing that industry likes is certainty, right? And so it's a very difficult time for Canada in many, many ways. But, I have I guess the silver lining is I have a lot of faith in the people who are representing us from across the country. Our Canadian ambassador to the U.S., Kristen Hillman, I've been there. I've been at the U.S. Embassy, or the Canadian Embassy in Washington, rather. She is phenomenal. And she knows what she is doing. She knows if there are levers, goodness knows whether there are, but if there are, she'll know where they are, and she'll know who to influence to help us get through this with the least damage. But I don't have anything, other than that to say. Yeah.
Barry, welcome back to Antigonish. I guess you're here all the time. I wanted to ask you a question about the old versus the new Senate. And historically, or, much of the time, I think an argument can be made that the Senate blocking really important bills often, obviously we think of the Free Trade Act and so forth, and maybe forcing an election on them or forcing a major rethink. You could argue that at least in political theory, that is a really important role in democracy. And have we lost this now with that role? Is the new Senate so independent that these 105 senators cannot muster the will or the votes, rather, to take on a government that maybe has overstepped and play that important democratic role? So I put that out there.
Yeah, good question. And my first answer is au contraire. Absolutely the opposite. More than ever, I think the fear actually is that and I think I understand there's a fear that we won't follow the Salisbury Convention. Okay. We are, as senators, conscious that we are the unelected House, right? We're also conscious that that House is elected on usually a platform of a number of main things that Canadians have put them in power to do, right? So it's hard to vote as a Senate against some of those things, right? But if it's something outside of those things that they're trying to slip through, there's no reason. We are not compelled in any way to not dig deep into it and reject it. It's a very rare thing in all the history of the Senate, as you know. And one of the big fears right now, is we've seen our provinces using the notwithstanding clause to override our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And there's been talk of that possibly happening at the federal level by certain party, at least one of the parties, in the future if they were to be elected, particularly around the area of criminal justice reform. I can tell you right now they're going to have a big fight with the Senate if the federal government tries to use the notwithstanding clause, because the Senate, as I have mentioned, is there to protect more than anybody else in Parliament the fundamental rights of Canadians. And so, if it's something that's getting at that, just you watch. There will be nothing that holds us back.
Thank you so much, Senator Coyle. A quick question for you. Since you sit on the Committee on Foreign Affairs, I wondered if you could speak to some of the priorities. I'm mindful of where we're at now. Obviously, everything has changed. You see what's happening now with USAID. There may be either higher pressure on Canada to contribute a larger amount of ODA, et cetera, but we just don't know. As you say, the crystal ball is, we haven't figured it out. But in terms of where you stand right now in the Senate, in terms of foreign policy, foreign affairs, what's the issues right now that you're grappling with?
Well, I think everybody knows Parliament is prorogued, right? So that means we're not sitting and our committees are not sitting. Everything is suspended. All that regular business of the Senate is suspended. So I'm actually not even at the moment a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee because and our chair is not actually the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. And I'll tell you, Eileen runs the Coady Institute here and is a good friend of mine. We very rarely talk about development issues at the Foreign Affairs Committee. We do sometimes. But I think it will become a bigger issue because of the assault on development assistance, not just by the U.S. with the dismantling of USAID, but look at the UK that's making a significant cut in their foreign assistance in order to fund the increase in their NATO contribution. And I'm not criticizing the increase in the NATO contribution or in any way, but this isn't just the U.S. and we know that there's been talk of that as well in Canada by certain parties as well, and not enough talk about that by other parties to know where they stand, other than one of the Liberal candidates, Karina Gould, I think is the only one who has mentioned it in one of the debates. So it's an issue. It's a big issue and a very important one. We do talk. In our Foreign Affairs Committee, we have special sessions on what's going on in Ukraine, and there's a lot of foreign assistance in Ukraine. What's going on in Sudan? Nobody even talks about Sudan. It's a huge crisis. What's going on in Israel and Palestine? Again, who's going to help rebuild, Palestine? It's going to be so costly. We think about these multiple crises around the world right now. And that's just the crisis stuff. Foreign assistance, as you know, goes to far more than that. In fact, it goes to things to help prevent that kind of stuff from happening, to build more stable democracies and communities, right? So it's a time of worry, but it will be a time where I hope I get back on the Foreign Affairs Committee and I can be a part of that, because we have I think I have a lot of confidence again in the very senior bureaucratic level in the Canadian government. A lot of people don't ever hear good things about them, but there's some absolutely fantastic people there, and our committee members are also outstanding, and so hopefully we'll be able to make some headway and deal with these crises when we know what they are. Yeah.
Senator Coyle, earlier in the evening, you spoke about the history of the Senate and how most of us would be familiar with the fact that it was basically a partisan body where there were Liberal senators and Conservative senators, and now it has certainly evolved into something that, well, in my opinion, is much more progressive and beneficial for Canadians. But you also mentioned that if there's a change of government, you have some, I don't know if you use the term fear, but that you had some concern about how the Senate could change again. How do you see that evolving or devolving, I guess you could say?
It's great to see this, group of people here tonight, and the students that I got to speak with earlier today as well. Showing the interest in actually sitting through this discussion on this, the Senate of Canada, the Senate today. Most Canadians, as I said before, don't really know anything about it and don't necessarily care very much about it if they do know about it. So there's a big job to be done to get the word out about the Senate and how the Senate has changed, and the promise. I mean, it's 8 years is the period of time that we've had the beginnings of this new iteration of Canada's upper chamber. That's not very long. It's proving itself to be a positive change, but there's still good questions to be asked about it. And how do we build in the safeguards? How do we continue to improve to make sure it's accountable, it's efficient, it's effective, it's actually producing the best laws for this country? So I am concerned that this was Justin Trudeau's baby, right? It was his. I don't even think it was the Liberal parties, to be honest. It was Justin Trudeau's baby, and I actually don't have a sense, because I'm not in those party conversations, to know even within the Liberal Party, let alone other parties, whether there's going to be a sustained appetite to continue to support this level of independence in the Senate, because I'm sure it's a pain. I'm sure sometimes Justin Trudeau scratching his head and his fellow ministers, what did we do? They're amending our bills. They're sending them back to us. They're causing more work for us, and so I do have a concern, and not just with other parties. I have, I'll be honest with you, I have a concern, and I don't know how well founded that concern is in terms of the Liberal Party either. But, time will tell. It's good that the Canadians who hear about the independent Senate go, oh yeah, that makes sense. We like that. And Atlantic Canadians, for some reason, like it even more than other Canadians. But, most Canadians, when they think of the Senate, they think about the expense scandal. When I was appointed, and for, I don't know, even up until now, when people find out I'm a senator that didn't know, they'll say, oh, how's Mike Duffy? Seriously, because they associate. And I'll say, well, you know what? I sat near Mike Duffy in the chamber, and Mike Duffy was a good, diligent senator, in the period I worked with Mike Duffy, and I just leave it there, right? Okay.
I'm just going to get, this person hasn't asked a question. Sorry, I'm just kind of cutting through the aisle, walking by. Don't mind me. Sorry.
This. Okay.
Say my question. You're not taking credit for my question that you said was good.
You go, Yashita.
How do you think the use and development of AI is going to change the Senate or government of Canada? And I know you said you're not allowed technology, but still, just
How do I think the use
and
the
development.
use of AI?
Yeah.
So the use of AI, how will that change? I've encouraged my staff to start using AI. In for certain things, it's great for synthesizing certain things, getting sources on one topic or another. I mean, we have to be careful about AI. And actually, one of the things, of course, we talk about is the benefits and the dangers, right? Often these things have two sides to them. And we were talking about how we need regulations in Canada, right, which are existent in other places, to make sure that we get the benefits of AI. AI is not going to go away, but that we also are regulated in such a way that we, as much as we can, reduce the risks that are associated with AI. And just for an example, I know, Yashita, you're very involved with climate issues. So one of the things that Senators for Climate Solutions is going to be doing, one of our next webinar sessions is going to be on the issue of climate and AI. Again, the two sides of the story, that AI is a huge energy user, which is problematic. And then the flip side is, and how can AI help us accelerate the responses to climate? What are the solutions associated with AI? And so there's people working on both sides of that equation, right? Not sure it answered your question. Okay.
Okay. Do you mind if I just get, because he hasn't asked a question? Okay. Sorry. The aisles aren't quite wide enough.
Senator, first of all, I'd just like to say that I think I've known you for 25 years, and you've been making a difference for 25 years. So I don't think you have to wait for anything to make a difference. I'm sure you were making a difference before then, too. I just don't have any data. I have a friend in your Senate, and he came from the tech sector. We built companies together. And so it's kind of like having one of your own inside. Yeah. And so Senator Coyle. And I have a friend from St. FX who's an MP over in PEI. And I wonder, when I look at our parliament and our whole setup, whether Senator Deakin has more influence than MP Scott. Is there an imbalance? And I don't mean an imbalance between two houses, but I mean, has the role of the MP become so nullified that the PMO just runs the government with the bureaucracy, and we're almost mirroring what's happening in the U.S. right now. And I think of this is the home of Robert Stanfield, the greatest prime minister we never had. He was the greatest prime minister we ever had because he could influence the agenda of the government and the legislation of the government when it came through, because that was the culture, and yet that doesn't seem to exist at all. That's my question.
I'm not on that side of the elected side, but I share your concerns about the consolidation of power in our democracy. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Thank you for your question. I share your concern about the consolidation of power outside of the House in the PMO, which we have seen a trend long before the current government and the current prime minister having been critical of that, of the previous regime, right? So it is a very real concern for our democracy, which is what you're raising here, and we're seeing consolidation of power at the top in other instances around the world. I am not a political scientist. I know Lavinia, Stan, and I were talking about this from the work that she's been doing over the years, and the trends that people are now seeing more to the south of us, but you're wise. For us, all citizens of Canada have to be alert to these things, right? We need our kids to be learning about the government, about Parliament, about how these things work, what their rights are, what the limits on power should be, what the checks and balances should be, and growing up to be informed citizens in our country that demand that of their representatives and demand that of the leaders of our government. The Senate, as you know, is we have to be very careful because we are the unelected body, right? We are the appointed body in this, and I've mentioned some of what I see as advantages to having this particular system of parliament here in Canada. But there's very little that can be done about what you're talking about from our position in the upper house. The only thing we can do is, informally, people who have relationships there, and also through question period, not overtly questioning, the concentration of power, but. Now, was this well, studied in the House of Commons, or did the House of Commons rush this through because it was originated there? How much study, how much genuine study happened in this committee? What time was spent on it at second and third reading? What was the quality of debate? What kinds of experts did you have in? Were the experts listened to? So we can ask those questions, but there are limits to what we can do in the upper chamber on that issue.
So we're coming close to our time. One more question. There's someone here that hasn't. Is that okay? You can go and ask her afterwards. All right.
Thanks, Mary. Very stimulating talk. I was wondering what the Senate connection is, if there is one, with the Canadian military. What about defense and the various crises in the military establishment, and the problem of female being a female in the military, and so on and so forth. So that didn't come up, probably because there's so much to talk about that you didn't mention that. The other thing that wasn't mentioned, and I only bring this up because to me it's so important, is you managed to talk for an hour without mentioning Ukraine or Israel-Palestine. You just mentioned it just in the questions, or Putin, or Xi, or North Korea, or Little Taiwan. I know these are all foreign affairs responsibilities, perhaps, but given that all those things are like elephants in the room, are you avoiding talking about those?
Okay, two questions there. The first question is about the military, and the second is about various international hotspots, places in crisis, places that we're worried about because of their power. So yeah, I didn't have enough time to talk about absolutely everything that I'm engaged in. I figured some of it would come out in the questions. In terms of the military, we have, as I mentioned, an Afghan war veteran in the Senate. She is a nurse. She started off as a nurse in the military and rose up the ranks to a very senior officer level. Senator Rebecca Patterson from Ontario. And she served in more than Afghanistan. And the issues around women in the military are very much issues that are brought out by her and by others. We have a group called, there's so many things I didn't tell you about, the Canadian Association of Feminist Parliamentarians. I didn't get to tell you about them. I'm a member of that, right? There's so many things that I've been there for 7 years. I couldn't condense it all. Sorry. Probably a good thing I didn't tell you all of the things. And I know PJ could probably tell you many more things as well. But we have a National Defense and Security Committee. And that committee, which I am not on, but it's a committee like all of them, I pay attention to what they do. Sometimes if there's a bill going through a committee that I particularly want to follow, but I'm not on that committee and I can't because I've got a conflict, I send one of my staff to follow a bill through. For instance, I'm not on the Social Affairs Committee. A lot of legislation goes through Social Affairs, like the disability benefit, like the Accessible Canada Act, like so many things, medical assistance dying, It also went through legal. So I dispatched my staff to these other meetings and I mean, I can read the Hansard as well, but I want them to give me the flavor of the discussion in the room as well. And that's a way that we, with our limited time and resources, are able to keep on top of those things that are important in the world and in Canada.
All right, so please join me in thanking Senator Coyle for coming out this evening. There was a small token. Thank you so much. So later this week, for those particularly students who are interested in how politics work, Dr. Joseph Corey will be giving a lunch and learn on the Thursday, yes. Dr. Corey had been the president of Nova Scotia Liberals and has run and organized conventions and leaderships. So if you're interested in how that works, because that's the day before the National Liberal Leadership Convention. So please join us for that. Our next event in this series is happening on March the 19th, which is a Wednesday. It'll be happening in the room next door, same time, different BAT channel, but same BAT time. It is Senator Régin Aucoin who'll be coming to speak about his reflections on minority languages and the work he's been doing in the Senate. So Senator Régin Aucoin is from Chiticat and will provide that Acadian experience and that he brings to the Senate. In the meantime, folks, thank you for coming. Drive safe, and I look forward to seeing you at our next event.